Uh, I know we've got records back into, 1500s.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Holy mackerel.
But what I'm going to talk about now is when the Ritters first came to the United States.
Okay. I got you going.
And I don't know how many great-grandfathers came into Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1827. Yeah. And he lived there until about 1840, I believe it was, and they moved to Allegheny, Pennsylvania, which now is part of Pittsburgh, north side Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And somewhere after that, they acquired a farm about a mile from where I grew up. And my dad has told me a lot of stories. And I guess it would be a great uncle. My dad was born in 1890.
Wow.
And anyway, they had the farm when the Civil War started. And I don't know if you remember the history of the Civil War. The first 2 years, and it went just almost pretty close to 4 years. First 2 years, the Confederates were winning. And in the beginning, they had a lot of volunteers, but then the battles got very fierce and deadly, and they weren't getting the volunteers. So President Lincoln inaugurated the draft in 1863. And how it affected my family is the government had a man on a horse. He had a census. And he would go to the little towns and farms and what have you. And he'd go to a particular place and he would say, so-and-so lives here. I want to see him. And of course, legally, he'd look on him, if you look healthy, you're in the army.
Wow.
And anyway, when he came to my ancestor's place, he had a number of children, and he was prematurely bald. So he looked older than what he really was. And that is something that has affected my father, my oldest brother, and my son. They both, in their early 20s, were close to bald. And anyway, this man on his horse come, they saw him, the kids. He says, no, I'm not going to take you. So, and the thing is, my dad lived on that farm until he was about 13 years old. And anyway, and to finish the story, this government man rode on a horse through a little valley. There's an old German cemetery there now. And it was on the route of that I passed in the school bus every day going to high school. Anyway, that guy went through into that valley, and somebody shot him off his horse.
Oh, wow.
Now, you talk about draft protest.
Yeah, I bet.
I always kidded Dad which uncle did the dirty deed. But as far as I know, I don't think anybody ever come back in there to draft. And but anyway, I had other relatives on my dad's side, uh, and but his mother, well, his grandmother would be my great grandmother, uh, and my great grandfather. Now they lived about 10 miles apart in Ireland. I'm not sure if they knew each other there, but anyway, each of them come over during the potato famine in Ireland. You're familiar with that? You know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm not.
The British, well, they tried to wipe out the Irish, and they wouldn't give them food, work. They had to live on ground that was very poor for farming and so forth. And then, due to climatic conditions, the people lived almost exclusively on potatoes. And there was a disease which they think came from the States with some potatoes they brought over for seed. But anyway, the potato crop failed. And the people just didn't have anything to eat. And so they scraped what little funds they had, and they came to the States. And I've got the records in my file, but I think one of them came over in 1847. I think that was my great-grandfather. And as I said, and then my great-grandmother came over in 1851. And this was, and of course it's the other side of my dad's family, the people that were here during the Civil War. And anyway, the story my dad tells is, and there are written records that disagree with this, but I trust what my dad told me. He had a great memory. He wouldn't have come up with things that weren't true. But anyway, the family, of course, lived in that area, and Dad was born in 1890, and when he was 13, so that would be 1903, my grandfather was an alcoholic. And I never knew this until many years later, because he was dead long before I come along. Both grandfathers were. But he had a business of horse and wagon. He delivered stuff for people. And with drink, he went off the deep end and lost everything. Dad was the oldest of 9 kids. He was the oldest boy, I'm sorry. He had one sister that was a couple years older. In fact, this gentleman I'm going to talk with later this afternoon, it would have been his grandmother. Okay. And anyway, Dad went into that mill at 13 years old. And of course, back in those days, they could do that. And he supported that family. See, until for about, that was 1903, for 17 years. He was married and married my mother in 1920. And he built, he and a couple of friends of his built the house that he lived in the rest of his life, which was right across the intersection from where he had lived with my grandmother and where all those kids were raised.
Okay.
And Anyway, he was married, 1920, and I was the fifth of six kids. And I was born in 1931 during the Depression. And a dad, he might work one day a week or 2 days or maybe go a couple of weeks without working. And of course, during the Depression, financially, it was very bad from 1929 on. And also, he was involved in labor activity. And he was the first president of the CIO in the valley that we lived in. And he would come home sometimes beat up because, they'd won strike and had protest and bring police, strong-armed men in to work on them. But anyway, I can remember growing up during the Depression. Now, that would be in the 30s, okay? And, of course, we were in the same boat as all of our neighbors. We lived in this little town where the men were either coal miners or they worked in a steel mill. And
What was that?
Dad, I think, went to the 6th grade in school. And he had to go out to help. I guess that was close to that 13-year deal, that he had to go to work. And anyway, he married my mother in 1920. And I had three older brothers. My oldest brother was in the Navy in World War II.
What was his name?
And he come out of the Pacific with mental problems he never got over. The next brother, about a year younger, went into the Army, and he died in an accident here in the States in 1944. The third brother was on the original crew of the Midway, a big carrier, and they were getting ready to go in for the invasion of Japan. When the bomb and what Joe Desch and his people did at NCR, I don't know if I've ever mentioned that to you. That's another story. Anyway, thank God, the war ended. My brother, he had troubles. He'd go for a couple of years. He'd be pretty good, and then all of a sudden he'd go off the deep end. And he married and had 9 kids. And it was not a good situation. They grew up. It was not very good at all. Eventually, he and my sister-in-law divorced. And anyway, I had a sister. Let's see, she would have been the third in line birth, and she had rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, and was sick a good bit of her life. She had 4 boys, and my parents and my sister Rosie, who you haven't met, Rosie turned 88 in February.
Okay.
And it was just she and I were the only 2 left in the family. They were very instrumental in raising those boys. And we had a couple of them at home when I was there. And But I, whenever the Korean War come along, that was my war. And I wanted to go because I was out of high school. I graduated from high school in 1949. So the Korean War started in June of 1950. And they were drafting like mad. But I was working. I worked for friends doing roofing and sheet metal work. And they were fine to work for. But I was bored. I thought I could do better than this. And I wanted to see some of the world. Well, my mother didn't want me to enlist. And I found out I could have gone to the government and I could have got a permanent deferment because of the family situation with my two brothers. But I waited until they called me up for the draft, and I took my physical. I get the notice, you have been rejected. You are 4F. That was the classification for somebody who was rejected from military service on medical reasons. And what they told me, just very briefly in the letter, is you have spots on your lungs because of all the pollution in the Pittsburgh area, and that you could get tuberculosis. I said, they're nuts. I'm perfectly healthy. I was climbing ladders, going high up on roofs, and working hard. So went to a family doctor. He sent me to a specialist, okay, who took some more x-rays. And he said, yeah. He said they were afraid they'd have to take care of you the rest of your life. But you should check this every 6 to 8 months anyway. So you come back, we'll look at it. He says, it might change. It might get worse or it might get better. So I went back, and it just so happened that doctor was on the draft board. He was one of the doctors who decided who goes and who doesn't. Now, of course, in the situation where I met him, he says, I can't say that you would pass your physical. I said, do you think I can? He looked at me and said, you crazy? That was in the middle of 1952, right in the middle of the Korean War.
Oh, wow.
He says, you really want to go? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm bored. And there was some patriotism involved. I didn't want to be left out. I didn't want to be the fourth boy that didn't serve his country. And so anyway, he said, okay, here, write to this address and to the government. They called me down and took another x-ray. A week, 10 days later, I had a notice to go in. Nobody could understand. They've never heard of anybody who'd been 4F was changed to 1A.
Wow.
See? And I said, wow, they want to get the war over. That's why they did that. See, actually, when the doctor said, okay, you can write a letter and request another physical, I talked to my dad. I told him what I wanted to do. He says, you don't tell your mother or anybody. But if that's what you want to do, you do it. And the family probably for more than 20 years never knew, nobody knew, that I had volunteered for another physical.
Okay.
Now, the thing is, had I gone in right away, I believe I would have been in Korea. I may have even volunteered to go over there. But they postponed me. The Korean War was funny. It lasted 3 years, and they started peace talks after a couple months of fighting. And these went on for the 3 years, and every so often it looked like the war was going to end, and then it would heat up again. But anyway, finally they called me to go in early July of 1953. And I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for basic training. And the basic training, the first 8 weeks, ended about the same time as the armistice that ended the Korean War. So I never went overseas. And it was weird. I always say the good Lord took care of me. But I had a chance to go to a heating and ventilating school. For some reason, I went out to the bulletin board one day and they said, the following people are eligible for these schools. If you're interested, sign up. And one of them was heating and ventilating, which I had done at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, closer to Pittsburgh. I said, I didn't think I'd get it, but I did. And I went through their little course and come out the head of the class, which was no real achievement, because
no surprise either.
from a practical point of view, I knew more than a lot of the instructors, and they kept me there as an instructor. And most of the guys were college graduates. Of course, I just had a high school diploma. And I figured, boy, if some of these guys could get through college, maybe I can too. And of course, they encouraged me. I had some very good friends. But I taught at Fort Belvoir until, of course, the war was ended, and they were trying to get rid of people. And if you told them that you want to go to college, they'd let you out. I got out 41 days early. And during my high school years, I became acquainted with the organization that runs UD. And anyway, I decided I wanted to go away from home. I thought, if you go to school, went to the Vets Administration. They gave me a bunch of tests. I wanted to be a civil engineer. See, I love the outdoors.